Pinky and the Brain, issue 24. We see Pinky holding a dowsing rod in the mountains that Brain thinks is gonna detect gold when the sun's at the right angle. The only reason it'd work is if this was advanced technology made by Brain and not just an ordinary divining rod. Brain didn't really answer his question. He holds it too high and gets electrocuted by a power line, so now he has to recalculate. Pinky's always fine after slapstick, so it makes sense that he doesn't get too worried. Pinky falls into a hole, but finds a bunch of treasure. He mentions the IRS, and somehow Brain talks as if he does pay taxes, even though he's legally considered to be just a lab mouse. So even if he was moral enough to want to pay them if he doesn't have to, he wouldn't be allowed to. Pinky somehow thinks the IRS can hear them, and Brain says he could build an empire. It's confusing that he says horseless carriages as if he doesn't know what a car is called, and yet he knows the word traffic. He'd have to know what cars are, because unless witches made these versions of them, they'd have to be made in a time after cars. It's like how in an earlier issue, he said that perhaps one day man will walk on the moon with computers like that. But they couldn't have been genetically engineered in the 60s. He must have been made by a witch there too. Brain says he'll get a bag of treasure first in return for the rest. And he says there's where he'll start. He talks as if he doesn't know the future of Los Angeles, even though he'd have to, unless he's from another universe where it doesn't exist. He wants to set up there and divert everyone's attention from the true base where his empire will spring forth. He tells some people he's a wealthy land baron moving there, and someone tells him that an army and evil generals invading the place. So everyone around him is told to pretend they're busy, because he thinks that'll make the army leave them alone for some reason. Brain reveals that he had the smart idea to tell Pinky not to talk to avoid looking stupid, but he talks anyways because he forgot his instruction. Wouldn't they have done this a lot earlier? And it backfires because he can't warn Brain to avoid getting stepped on. He smiles after that, as if he doesn't really care about him. Which would make sense if it's because he has some resentment for him for abusing him, and he knows he can heal fast anyways. Brain sees the bad guy from above look at a map and plan on stealing his treasure. How inconvenient for him. That could have easily not been the case. Why would someone hide treasure there instead of in the place they live? Brain and Pinky go from whispering to talking, which means there's no reason these humans wouldn't hear them. Brain says he's gonna dress up in a costume with a fake name and sword. This makes no sense. It's clearly only happening for a pop culture reference to Zorro. He'd only get this idea if he was already familiar with it. Why is he even planning on using a sword if he's been established to not be the violent type, and Pinky definitely wouldn't approve? He's got a sword he's never gonna hurt anyone with. And where'd he get that costume and sword? He plans on getting the general mad and distracted in the hopes that he'd somehow forget about the treasure. It sounds like a risky, dumb plan, but not if he's actually able to heal really fast. Then he's just taking advantage of its invincibility. He swings towards him on a rope that's hanging from nothing, and has been since the previous panel where it was definitely hanging from nothing. The bad guy complains that the map is awful and he's been digging in the wrong place. He stops Brain with his hand and refers to his threat as one and calls him a mosquito. It makes no sense unless he already knows who Brain is from word of mouth, and is deliberately ignoring him because he's so incompetent. Because a normal person wouldn't act totally dismissive after seeing a talking mouse try to kill him with a sword. And even a bad guy wouldn't just block him and ignore him. He'd try to kill him or something in revenge so that he wouldn't try to do it again. There's no reason he'd let him live. Pinky gets spun around a wheel, but there's no explanation for how that happened. An old lady hits Brain even though the text box said he rescued the governor's daughter. So that sucks. And Brain gets a bounty put on him. I hate this because it's not made clear why this happened. It just got skipped over in 2 panels of vagueness. Then some unfair tax money gets put in a huge pile outside, and people cheerfully run towards it. Good, but nobody knows Brain did it, somehow. I guess because he's too small, so they saw the money first. So he's trying to get people to like him and make him the ruler. That seems like a complete deviation from his plan to keep the treasure from getting stolen. Brain says he'll never get the bad guy to notice him. And I love that Pinky says, maybe you should become a blonde. The bad guy says this map is also an Aztec placemat, and assumes that's why he couldn't find the treasure. Brain throws something down the roof and gets the bad guy mad because he soiled his uniform, even though he can't see anything different. Brain stops his sword with his, and I have to assume he jumped high enough to make a C in his pants. But it sure was amazing that he was able to do that without actually hurting him in the heat of battle, when he was already distracted trying to avoid getting hurt. He runs off riding piggyback on Pinky. I love that Pinky knew to do that right away. The bad guy decides to hunt down Brain once and for all because Brain's been scaring his grunts into saying he lost his nerve. Brain gets threatened with tons of people with spears and horses and says he's got plenty of allies. And he points out a bunch of fishermen standing above them. How is that supposed to be intimidating when they don't have weapons? Pinky is standing behind a cardboard cutout of a person, standing on something that sprays the smell of salmon. And that scares the bad guys away, but causes them to run towards the treasure, which would make more sense if they were doing that on purpose because the bad guy inevitably figured out the map after looking at the right side of it. If only Brain could have destroyed his map, but I assume that he can't get alone with it because the bad guy lives with his grunts who are always guarding him. Brain tells Pinky to take a bath and spies on the bad guy and says he's near the treasure, without whispering, so he should have heard him. Brain tells Pinky to place the dynamite around and wait for his signal, and it draws a C in the bad guy's map. He could have completely destroyed the map if he was able to do that, but it's too late for that to matter now. He says this place is surrounded by cannons, but Pinky can't get a fire going, for no reason. Brain gets threatened by a sword, and Pinky gets the brilliant idea to break a bottle and use it to magnify the sun's rays and cause a fire. That was easy. See, this is why I don't hate Pinky. This is why I don't like to call him an idiot. Because he's actually got smart ideas sometimes. Instead of being a character I'm not supposed to think is an idiot, but usually is. So the bad guys get scared by seeing explosions, and have their horses help them run away from him, and go back to where they never even heard of Brain. Pinky then shows Brain what he did to activate the dynamite to activate some more. But the problem is that the dynamite's right next to them, so because he didn't think ahead, they explode on them. And that triggers an earthquake and cracks open the ground. The treasure falls into the crack, and Brain complains that his gold is gone. As if I'm supposed to believe him. Even though he could easily invent something to let him fly down to get the treasure and retrieve it whenever he wants. This just did him a favor by hiding it better. I thought the dynamite would blow up the treasure, although that'd still make no sense because nobody would set off dynamite next to them without throwing it far away afterwards. Since these stories have no continuity and already got away with having a brine monkey brain get eaten, the story could have had Pinky blow them up and that'd make more sense. So that's the end of the story, even though Brain has no excuse for giving up because he still knows where the treasure is and can always get to wherever he wants. He can survive anything, so at this point I believe he could survive jumping down into the gold. In the next story, Brain says the nanovirus technology will soon be his to make all of the computers but his think it's 1968. That only mattered if he was speaking metaphorically and he meant that he was going to downgrade every computer until people would agree to make him the world's ruler. Why doesn't he realize people would just go back on that after agreeing to it, no matter what the plan was? Why are they dressed like this? Brain cuts apart a chain-link fence and Pinky sees some dogs with muzzles on with their paws tied up. And he jokes around and laughs, which is smarter of them than pitying them, because there's obstacles, but pitying them might be more in character. Brain sure was competent if he could do that to these dogs that are much bigger than him. I guess he sent robots to do it. That'd be more believable. He fires his magic rope shooter, which doesn't just send him flying backwards afterwards by the same amount of horizontal distance that the rope was sent forwards to, even though every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's from a witch. Pinky jokes around, and they climb up to the roof and see Snowball out of nowhere, and he's with a hamster who must be genetically altered as well because she's got clothes and hair. And Pinky falls for her right away, and she conveniently falls for him too. It turns out this isn't Snowball's girlfriend, instead his sister Cupcake. There was no indication that he had any family members around him, but if he did, It makes sense that they got the same treatment as him, but it must have been only really recent for her because she just showed up to start helping him. Brain would hear Pinky flirting with her. He pulls Pinky away, and the next day he stands in front of an amusement park roller coaster with nobody else around, even though it's daytime. Pinky says the last time they rode it, Brain threw up. There's no reason they'd be allowed on it because of their height. They wouldn't even stay in the ride. They'd have to hide in someone's clothes to be on the ride. Brain plans on ruining the ride, but since this is his second plan to take over the world and the two plans have been really close together, should I even care what he's saying? It's clear the plot's going to be about him constantly failing much faster than usual because he somehow keeps running into Snowball by sheer coincidence, and uncharacteristically runs away from him instead of the two fighting like they always do when they meet. He talked way too much for one tax bubble. How does he think that people riding on the ride would induce nausea on other people? Go figure, they find Snowball. And when Pinky flirts with his sister, Brain pulls him away. The only reason it makes sense for him to keep leaving right away instead of fighting with Snowball is that he knows Pinky's flirting with her and wants to get him away from her. Which is in character because every time Pinky showed interest in Melmouse or the Queen of Gimme Town, he slapped him or got mad. So he is jealous and possessive of him. But here he's not treating him like that, because he's not staring at her and acting like he can't hear him. I have no reason to care about Snowball's plan either, because it's instantly obvious that he'll run into Pinky. This story sucks. It's just repetition and not letting an actual plot start. Snowball plans on getting balls into orbit to render the world's security systems useless with a jamming device leaving the door open for him to take over. But does the White House have a security system? No, of course not. So why does he think he'd need to do this to take over? He'd have a better point saying that he'll agree to stop the jamming device if he's made the ruler. Even then, they'd just kick him out of the White House as soon as he stops it. Brain would hear Pinky get asked if he likes home cooking, and when he'd see Pinky and try to pull him away, he'd see him holding her hands. So he must have let them go first. They'd all hear her say Pinky's name as if she's sad he's been taken away from her. It sure is convenient that they're all not acting antagonistic with them for this. Brain tells Pinky to get off the phone. I assume he's talking to Cupcake, and Brain would know it's her. Brain says he'll drop a bunch of bubble wrap on the convention center, and as the attendees would pop it, because nobody could resist it, the resulting massive amount of noise would deafen the entire planet. No, it wouldn't. It only deafened the people in that one room. And even then, how would that make him the world's ruler? It'd just make them mad at him. Of course, they see Snowball again. It's nice of Cupcake to make Pinky a cheesecake. But it sure is convenient that any genetically altered animals can get attracted to people outside of their species effortlessly. It's nice of Pinky to give her flowers. She compliments them and he thanks her. After they talk to each other a lot in front of Brain and Snowball, Brain walks away again. Why don't either Brain or Snowball ever try to fight each other? The writer's wasting potential ideas for issues over and over again on plans that don't get off the ground. You'd think they would try to stop each other's plans, because they'd be terrified that the plan would work if it wasn't stopped. It's not like he's been intimidated away from him. Finally, Brain asks how Snowball keeps getting his ideas. I was wondering that too. It must be Pinky. It's happening too often for coincidence's sake. But I didn't expect the story to run off logic, because already it threw logic out the window by having Snowball and Brain meet up the first time by sheer coincidence. Brain assumes Snowball's been spying on him, rather than assuming that Pinky's been telling Brain's plan to Snowball's sister during his calls with her, to make sure they'd meet up every night, because he trusts Pinky's loyalty to him. And Snowball did spy on him in an earlier issue, so he's got a good reason to assume this. He decides to go to Snowball's place to spy on him. You mean he knows where he lives? That makes it all the stupider that he hasn't done anything to him, like turn him into a potted plant. That way it would get rid of him while still being non-violent. Also, why doesn't Snowball do that to Brain? Meanwhile, Snowball got the idea to sneak into Acme Lab to look for spying devices while he checked Brain's records. They both turn on a TV screen and see each other. And Snowball sees Pinky holding pieces of paper in the background, while Cupcake is doing the same behind him. They scream and start fighting while wearing different outfits. So they're in a different place now. They hear Pinky and Cupcake talking behind them. And Pinky has no reason to say to her that they always tell each other their plans for taking over the world, and say they do that every night, because she already knows that. But it is justified that he tells her Brain's next plan here. After all, even if he does genuinely care about Brain, anyone would realize that his plans always fail, so it makes sense that he wouldn't care if they got foiled or not. Especially since he knows that Brain's the happiest when he's trying to take over the world, and not when he's actually done it. So even him foiling his plans could be him trying to do him a favor, subconsciously. After all, he did revert the world to normal when he was Tinkerbell. Brain and Snowball complain about this, with Snowball talking as if he just now figured out that Cupcake's in love with Pinky. Sure, maybe he couldn't hear her talking to Pinky over the sound of him arguing with Brain. I guess that's a plausible explanation for being oblivious. But they have eyes. Snowball and Brain decide to form an alliance to break Pinky up with Snowball's sister. She doesn't have a personality beyond liking Pinky. We see Pinky making her laugh with a joke while they're reading some Looney Tunes magazine or something. Snowball says the male model he hired is here, and he says she's fallen for him. Pinky would hear every word Snowball is saying. Then we see the model lose his wig to Pinky, and Cupcake hugs him. Then Pinky goes to a fortune teller, and obviously know it was Brain right away. Maybe the idea is he assumes it's another genetically altered mouse he never met before. And the existence of Melmouse and Billy make that plausible. But he looks too much like Brain, and he'd recognize Brain's voice, unless he disguised it. Brain tells them some awful things about their future, but they love what they got told. Then we see Brain and Snowball sitting on lever-controlled human suits. Pinky and Cupcake would instantly recognize them. They're just playing dumb. They get bribed with $1 million to break up, and refuse. Maybe they don't really have $1 million? Or Brain found that treasure that he said was lost. Pinky says they eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches together. It's nice that they get to enjoy those together. Just as Brain is giving up and offering Pinky his congratulations, Pinky tells Cupcake to write him from Swedish school, of all places. There's no reason she'd go there and get separated from Pinky if she turned down $1 million to break up with him. They broke up off screen because they like different peanut butters. That's forced. They could easily not eat the same type of peanut butter together. Just buy 2 different jars. The writer didn't know how to end the story properly. Again. She says they weren't compatible, but they always got along. What they should be saying is they want to humor Brain and Snowball. When Pinky said they ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches together, I assumed they already did that. Not that he was saying they're about to. Pinky should have said they broke up because they knew they were inconveniencing Snowball and Brain, when they should have just scheduled dates on their own time. But I assume they literally don't have any free time thanks to the plans. Cupcake sniffles because of this, which makes it even more forced that they broke up. Why does Pinky think Brain's disappointed and apologize? The first story by Jesse McCann has Pinky find treasure he has no chance of finding underground, but did anyways, even though it'd be where someone lives instead. And after a frustrating story where Brain keeps getting hurt by dressing up and acting like Zorro for no reason, eventually Pinky scares away some bad guys who are looking for it because they hear explosions from dynamite. How did they get it anyways? I guess Brain made it. But after Pinky shows Brain how he lit the dynamite by doing it again, the explosion sends the gold falling away from them, but it falls into a crack in the desert that doesn't get filled up. So there's no excuse for Brain acting like he'll never be able to get the gold when he's always able to get wherever he wants, including to the North and South Poles. So they would have made a tiny helicopter to fly there. He literally flew in a toy helicopter in one story. And I'm sure he can invent things to lift the treasure out of there. He's also used a time machine in the show. So there's no reason he wouldn't just use a time machine to get that gold. Unless this is a universe where he doesn't have one invented yet. He thinks he can make anything, so he would have done that anyways. The second story by Jesse is a repetitive and contrived one that keeps wasting these plans of Brain's just for them to never get off the ground because somehow he decides to leave after he sees Snowball. When every other time he sees him, they fight. And he'd be worried that he'd succeed in his plan. So there's no reason he'd leave every time and take forever to find out Pinky fell in love with Cupcake and try to break them up. There's no way Snowball and Brain would have met the first time because that relies on an impossible coincidence, when there's so many different other places they could be. There's no way Pinky and her would break up over something so petty but still part ways on good terms with each other. to the point where she wants to write him from a Swedish school of all places. It was sweet seeing Pinky happy with her, but it takes forever for the actual plot to start going somewhere. So it should have skipped to the only interesting part when Snowball and Brain keep failing to break them up. Only for them to break up on their own for no logical reason when obviously they could have broken up to stop inconveniencing Snowball and Brain, when it seemed out of character for Pinky to do that to Brain in the first place.